Welcome to the presentation Next Steps After Signing a THPO Agreement with the National Park Service. This presentation was recorded by the Tribal Historic Preservation Program in July of 2019. My name is Jamie Lee Marks, and I am the Program Manager for the Tribal Historic Preservation Program at the National Park Service. The office is primarily responsible for designating new THPOs, entering into agreements with THPOs, and monitoring those agreements. You can reach me at THPO_program@nps.gov. My office phone number is 202-354-6463. This presentation is for individuals who have recently signed a Memorandum of Agreement with the National Park Service that transfers historic preservation duties on tribal lands from a state to a tribal official. It may also be helpful to individuals who are new to working with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office on the tribal side. So if you're a new THPO or have a new THPO agreement, this presentation is for you. This presentation has 4 main goals. By the end of it, you will understand the immediate impacts of the THPO Memorandum of Agreement you've signed with the National Park Service. You will also understand the National Park Service staff who work to support Tribal Historic Preservation Officers in their agreements and grants with the National Park Service. You will also understand how the Historic Preservation Fund operates in the annual THPO grant cycle. Finally, you will understand what comes next in terms of your grant eligibility. This video does not review how to apply to enter into a THPO agreement with the National Park Service. This video is more for individuals who have already completed that process. If you are interested in going through that process and applying, please contact me as soon as possible. This video will also not give detailed step-by-step information about how to submit grant applications or grant reports. That information can be found in other training videos, and if you're curious, you can hop online to look at it now at nps.gov/THPO/grants. I would like to start by answering some of the most frequently asked questions I receive about new THPO agreements. The first is, when does the THPO agreement take effect? The short answer to that is immediately. All of the provisions in the agreement do take effect as soon as the agreement has been signed by tribal leadership and the director of the National Park Service. That means that historic preservation functions taken on in the agreement are now under tribal jurisdiction on current tribal lands. The second question you may have is what happens now in terms of funding? The THPO agreement does make the tribe eligible to apply for annual non-competitive funding that is specifically set aside for THPOs. If your agreement has been signed by July 31st, you will be eligible to apply for funding during the next fiscal year. The slides to come will discuss that funding timelines, how you will be notified of the opportunity to apply for that funding, and more. The agreement needs to be kept intact in order for the tribe to continue to be eligible to apply for those funds. That leads to the third most frequently asked question: what keeps the agreement intact? There is an annual reporting requirement that is part of the THPO agreement. It can be found in Article 7 of your agreement and outlines what information needs to be reported on each year to sustain the agreement. Those reporting requirements exist whether or not THPOs apply to or receive annual funding. Annual reports contain, at a minimum, the number of additional properties surveyed and added to the tribe's inventory, the number of federal undertakings reviewed pursuant to Section 106, and a description of any educational activities and programs carried out. They are due annually by December 31st. Notices about funding, reporting, and more make keeping the National Park Service updated on THPO contact information very important. Not only is it a requirement in the Memorandum of Agreement, but crucial to making sure we can do our jobs and communicate with you when there are grants available, when reporting is due, and more. There are several staff at the National Park Service who work to support THPO agreements and THPO grants. I work on the agreement side in the Tribal Historic Preservation Program as the Program Manager. My job is to review THPO applications and manage all aspects of entering into THPO agreements with the National Park Service. If you recently entered into a THPO agreement, we work together on your application materials. Entering into new agreements and keeping your agreements intact are my main roles here at the National Park Service. I review all annual activities reports that are required by the THPO agreement. I am also responsible for updating THPO contact information and land information on behalf of the Park Service. The Park Service keeps a public-facing database that lists all tribes who have entered into a formal THPO agreement with the Park Service, along with that THPO's contact information. Because of this responsibility and because we send all crucial communication directly to THPOs, it is important to update me when there is a change in THPO or in the email address or phone number we need to use to contact you. I am also the point of contact for updating the acreage of tribal land as defined in the National Historic Preservation Act. Currently, all acres within the external boundary of a current reservation, plus any additional land held in trust for the benefit of the tribe, constitutes tribal lands for this program. Therefore, when new land is taken into trust, that land is under the jurisdiction of the THPO. Updating our program files to reflect this update helps us have clear information about land jurisdiction. Additionally, the total acreage of tribal lands, as defined in federal preservation law, is used to calculate a portion of the THPO grants annually. It is important to update me if land is taken into trust. Another role of my office is to communicate with you and help you to communicate with officials at the Park Service. If you have a question about something, if I don't know the answer, I can help connect you to someone who does. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Your primary point of contact for your THPO grant will be the State, Tribal, Local Plans and Grants Division. Here at the National Park Service, we refer to them lovingly as SteelPig. The office provides technical assistance and support and manages grants for state, territorial, tribal, and local governments. The office manages SHPO and THPO grants. The manager of the THPO grant program is Ginger Carter. She is also the THPO grant manager for tribes with names starting with an A to an N in the alphabet. Madeline Kahns is the grant manager for tribes with names starting between an O and a Z in the alphabet. They review your grant applications and annual financial reports and are the key point of contact for your questions about your THPO grants. We often work together and are all here to support you together. THPOs who do not apply to or accept THPO annual grants may have less interactions with these offices. However, they also manage several competitive grant programs that may be of interest to tribes with THPOs, even if you don't apply to or accept THPO funding. Please visit their website at nps.gov/steelpig for more information, or go ahead and email preservation_grants@nps.gov to connect. Annual non-competitive THPO grants are funded by the Historic Preservation Fund. Congress created the fund with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 and began funding it in 1976. The National Park Service is the government agency that administers the Historic Preservation Fund, or the HPF. The HPF provides grants to state and tribal historic preservation offices to pay for surveys, trainings, and more. The HPF is funded by revenue from offshore oil and gas leases. The Historic Preservation Fund is authorized to receive $150 million each year through fiscal year 2023. Like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the HPF is subject to congressional appropriations during the annual budget process. Actual appropriations to the fund have varied over the years, ranging from $54 million to $100 million between 2009 and 2017. Congress can choose to appropriate supplemental funding in the event of natural disasters such as hurricanes, as they did in 2013 and 2018. How much the HPF will receive and for what purposes is subject to congressional appropriations during the annual budget process. Each year, Congress appropriates a certain line item of the HPF funding for tribes. When Congress appropriates those funds, impacts the timing of grant application availability for the National Park Service. The agency cannot advertise funds that have not been appropriated. Because the funds are appropriated annually, THPOs also submit an application to the funds annually and report on the funds annually as well. However, the funds can be used for 2 fiscal years. Reporting on your THPO grant during the first year of a grant agreement requires an annual reporting package. Reporting on a grant during the second and final year typically requires a closeout reporting package. This means that generally speaking, THPOs are submitting 1 annual report and 1 closeout report each year. The THPO grant managers provide specialized training and information about applying to and reporting on THPO grants. The deadline for new agreements and land updates annually is July 31st. This date used to be June 30th, but was updated in 2019, so if you see that number floating around, that is why. Those THPOs with an agreement signed before July 31st, 2019 will be eligible for fiscal year 2020 grants. THPOs with an agreement signed before July 31st, 2020 will be eligible for fiscal year 2021 grants, and so on. The federal fiscal year starts on October 1st and ends on September 30th annually. THPO grants are applied to annually but can be used during 2 federal fiscal years. One thing you can do now to ensure you are prepared to apply to THPO grants when they are live and open for applications is to make sure the tribe is registered with an active account in the following systems. They are necessary to applying to the grant and for the National Park Service to be able to deposit funds into your grant account. Some registrations can take weeks to process, so I recommend checking in with your financial staff or administration and ensuring you're registered and active as early as possible. The first is grants.gov. This is the system where you will submit your grant application and find the official notice of funding opportunity. The next is sam.gov. SAM is the system for award management. This is where you can register with the tribe's DUNS number, which identifies it as a unique entity. asap.gov. ASAP stands for Automated Standard Application for Payments and is the system that processes electronic payments for federal agencies. It is a good idea to touch base with financial staff or grants professionals you work with about the grants in the federal grant process. Every tribe is different in terms of how it approaches applying to and reporting on federal grants. In some tribes, the THPO is responsible for applying to THPO grants and turning in the financial forms during the application and reporting process. In others, financial staff apply to and report on the grants, and the THPO submits only the activities reports and work plan for the year. You will need to determine how your organization approaches the work. In either case, the THPO is seen by the National Park Service as the main point of contact on all matters related to the THPO agreement and grant. Because of the process of receiving approval to release THPO funds, it is not possible for the National Park Service to know when exactly the annual grants will go live and become open to applications. The following slide will give you an overview of the process that the fund goes through before it reaches you. The annual Tribal Historic Preservation Fund cycle involves Congress, the National Park Service, the Department of the Interior, where the National Park Service is housed, and Tribal Historic Preservation Offices. First, Congress appropriates the historic preservation funds for the fiscal year and designates a specific amount to the tribal line item of the fund. Then, the National Park Service gets to work determining what that number means for the program. Annually, on July 31st, the National Park Service has a record of new THPOs who are eligible for grants and has received updated land data for the year. Then, with that list of eligible THPOs on hand, the National Park Service calculates how much each THPO receives of that tribal line item. 88% of annual THPO funds are divided equally between all THPOs. The remaining percentage is divided using an algorithm that takes the square root of tribal lands as defined in the National Historic Preservation Act. Thus, THPOs with a larger land base do receive slightly more funding. Once those numbers have been calculated, the National Park Service sends those planning figures to eligible THPOs so that their offices can start working on their grant applications as soon as possible. The National Park Service then sends those funding figures to the Department of the Interior for approval. Once the Department of the Interior approves the numbers, the National Park Service lists the notice of funding opportunity on grants.gov and sends an alert email to all THPOs letting them know that the grant opportunity is live. The opportunity will be on grants.gov for an application window. Please be sensitive to the deadline for this grant application as it is a hard deadline. Grant managers send out links to training about how to apply to the grant as well as specific instructions to all THPOs. Then, THPOs apply to their funding on grants.gov before the deadline. Grants managers at the National Park Service can process grant applications when they are submitted, so I strongly encourage turning them in as soon as you can instead of waiting for the deadline. Then annually, on December 31st, THPOs report on the use of THPO funds. This date is fixed regardless of when the funds were applied to or received. The main thing I want to drive home in this presentation is that communication is key. We send you information about grant application training, grants that are available, deadlines, and more via email. If there is a new THPO or new email address for your THPO, please let us know. Not only is this in the terms of your agreement with us, but it helps us share information with you that you need to know. The THPO is the key point of contact that receives alerts, updates, and communications about opportunities, reporting, and more. This has been a very general overview of what you can expect now that you're part of the federal network of tribal historic preservation partners. If you want to learn more about what we do on the THPO program side of things, please visit our website at nps.gov/THPO program or reach out to me. If you want to learn more information about THPO grants, please visit www.nps.gov/THPO/grants. I also recommend taking a look at SteelPig's website at www.nps.gov/steelpig, STLPG, to learn about competitive grant opportunities that tribes are eligible to apply for as well. This has been a presentation from the Tribal Historic Preservation Program at the National Park Service. Please do not hesitate to email us with any questions or comments. THPO_program@nps.gov.